The Ducks, well, actually, to be more accurate, the Gulls made a trade. We'll talk about that and the last couple of games on this episode of Locked On Anaheim Ducks.
You're Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jason JD Hernandez. I've been covering hockey for well over a decade. A reminder, as I adjust, actually I'm going to start the whole thing over again because that whole thing shifted. It shouldn't have shifted. The whole thing should not have shifted like that. What's going on? Yeah, that wasn't supposed to happen. Now we're good. You know, blooper reel, leave it all in on the video side. Audio side, not so much. The Ducks made another trade, or more accurately, the Gulls made a trade before the deadline. We'll talk about that and the last couple of San Diego Gulls games on this episode of Locked On Anaheim Ducks. Welcome to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jason JD Hernandez. I've been covering hockey, particularly minor league hockey, for over a decade. I've been covering the American Hockey League for 9 years. Also have contributed to Defend the Nest, and also the public address voice for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. A reminder, this podcast is free and available across all platforms, and thank you for making this your first listen. And thanks to those everydayers that tune in or listen in. Very much appreciated. All right, we had another trade take place before the deadline, and while this was deemed a Ducks trade, let's be real here, this is a de facto minor league trade because this involved a couple of players in the American Hockey League. And this is not a big blockbuster deal, but this one is pretty important because this resulted in the San Diego Gulls being shorthanded, yes, literally shorthanded, against the Coachella Valley Firebirds. In fact, it wasn't even an 11-7. This was 19 guys dressed. The Gulls didn't have literally enough bodies to dress. And I know there was some speculation as to why Jacob Perreault did not dress. He was a healthy scratch, even though they were shorthanded. And I immediately knew what was going on. I had heard the rumblings. Actually, more accurately, hat tip to John Broadbent from Defend the Nest, who called this a while ago. He had mentioned on his blog and to me that Jacob Perreault has been struggling a bit. He's had some games where he hasn't really found his place, and it was just time for a change. So with that being said, and I'll actually not say the Ducks and Canadians, I'll say the Gulls and Laval Rocket because, that's technically what this is. But, in the most technical terms, the Anaheim Ducks traded away Jacob Perreault for the services of Jan Mysak from the Montreal Canadiens. And now I'll say what I really want to say. The Gulls traded away Perreault for Mysak. So I'm going to start with the San Diego side first. Jacob Perreault was drafted in the 2020 draft. He was one of those top round picks. He actually was pick number 27 for the Anaheim Ducks back in 2020. I had just mentioned Jacob Perreault on the previous podcast, and the reason that I hesitated when I got to Jacob Perreault was because I had heard that there was a possibility he could be traded. And this was yesterday. Now that it's official, Jacob Perreault is no longer a member of the Anaheim Ducks. He did play one game with the Ducks a couple years ago. This was at the tail end of the season when there was a slew of call-ups from the San Diego Gulls, and Jacob Perreault was one of them. Braden Tracy was another one. There was just a lot going on at that time. And I remember looking back at the end of that season thinking, okay, is this going to be like a confidence booster for Jacob Perreault? I mean, 2021 was pretty solid. 2022 was a pretty good year for Jacob Perreault. I thought he had gained momentum. I thought he had gained confidence. But unfortunately, it wasn't so. And on top of that, there was some other guys that only played like a couple of games. I know Hunter Drew got called up. I mentioned Braden Tracy. Oh, Bryce Kindop, he got called up. Yeah, it was an interesting time for the Ducks in 21-22. That was also when we finally saw Lukáš Dostal get called up. So I thought, okay, now it's time. That was the only NHL action he got. Last season took a bit of a turn. There was some games where he was healthy scratch, but he was injured quite a bit last season. Only 19 points in 48 games. That was a downturn. This year, unfortunately, even lower, only 18 points. And he had been injured a little bit this season, but also healthy scratched this season. And I think when you get healthy scratched as much as Jacob Perreault has, your confidence has got to go down, unfortunately. And I think at this point, it's just a change of scenery thing. Jacob Perreault does have the capability. He does have the talent to be not a top line scorer in the AHL, but he could be a top 6 guy in the American Hockey League. And now that we've seen him in the third line and a couple of times, even the fourth line this season, that's when I knew, yeah, it's time for a change. And unfortunately, that change comes with Perreault leaving the San Diego Gulls. And he will report immediately to Laval Rocket. Maybe this will be a good change for him. I mean, Jacob Perreault is from the province of Quebec. So he goes back to his hometown. I mean, he was born in Montreal. He grew up in the surrounding area. And he's familiar with, like the community out there. He has family out there in the Montreal area. So for Jacob Perreault, it'll be a bit of a homecoming. And I think, honestly, that's probably what he needs right now. He needs that confidence booster. He needs to just come back home and try to build up something good with the Laval Rocket. So, happy trails to Jacob Perreault. It's been a fine few years. All right, we're going to head into the first intermission. And before I talk about the last few games, I'm going to talk about what the Gulls received in that deal. We'll get to that on the other side. Now, a brief word from Indeed. And folks, if you need to hire, you need Indeed, because you can give your team the best shot at recruiting more MVPs with Indeed. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. And it also makes it easy to hire great talent. According to ComScore, Indeed is the #1 job site worldwide. And Indeed delivers 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined. So start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer valid through March 31st. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon. Claim your credit before March 31st. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Welcome back to episode number 841 of Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, you're locked in with Jason JD Hernandez, and we're talking about the latest trade that happened right before the deadline, but this is essentially an AHL deal. Jacob Perreault for Jan Mysak. And let's talk about Jan Mysak, who had been battling injuries 2 years ago. And he's finally started to put it together somewhat with Laval Rocket. And now he gets over to the San Diego Gulls. Mysak was a second-round pick in the 2020 draft. So he was a few picks after Jacob Perreault in that 2020 draft. As far as Mysak's accomplishments, well, I think one of his biggest ones was playing in World Juniors and representing Czechia. And he was also the captain for Team Czechia back in 2022 and was named the tournament all-star. So that's a big accomplishment. But I think one that he's probably very proud of is what he did in the Memorial Cup playoffs. We got to go back to June 27th, 2022 against Shawinigan. The 2022 Hamilton Bulldogs were definitely the favorites and did win the OHL Cup. So they went to the Memorial Cup hoping to hoist that trophy. And those of you eagle-eyed fans might recall the 2022 Hamilton Bulldogs because there was a certain someone on that team. Who could it be? Oh, that's right. Mason McTavish was on that team. Yeah, those of you might recall. McTavish acted as the captain, and yeah, Mysak served as an alternate captain. And Mysak scored the game-winning goal in overtime against Shawinigan to send the Hamilton Bulldogs to the Memorial Cup final. They did eventually lose the final game, but you know what? For Jan Mysak to get that overtime game winner, one of his biggest accomplishments. As far as other stats, well, he ended that season with 64 points in 61 games, had that all-important goal in the Memorial Cup. In 3 seasons with the Laval Rocket, or parts of 3 seasons, he's got 28 points. Well, none in his first season, or actually no, I take back, 31 points. 20 points this season, so he has been on the rise. 20 points in 48 games. He's been healthy scratch this season, also has been battling injury, but also he has started to kind of put it together somewhat, and that you kind of want to see with the young player like that. His confidence is starting to pick up a little bit, but this is also a change of scenery type thing for the young Czech forward. This is a good trade. This is a good trade on both sides. Mysak does provide a certain scoring depth that the San Diego Gulls desperately need. As far as Jacob Perreault, a change of scenery back to home. So I call this a good trade on both sides. Truly, I do. So once again, Jan Mysak heading to the San Diego Gulls. Yeah, that'll be a fun one. Oh, by the way, also on that Hamilton Bulldogs team, Logan Morrison, who's part of the Firebirds right now, who I'll talk about in a second. Logan Morrison was on that team. Also, Ryan Winterton was on that team. I'll talk about him in a second as well. Mason McTavish and Arbert Jackeye. Yeah. That's a pretty neat little team they had together. That one was fun to watch, I'll admit. All right. Let's talk about the games in hand. San Diego had an interesting week. They've had an interesting few games. They had that long losing streak. It was looking like they were just ready to take last place once again. Yeah, it was looking like that. And then they finally broke through. But we've got to start with the game. Actually, I talked about the games against Texas last week. I got to talk about the last 3 games. The game in Ontario last Friday. That was one of the tougher games for San Diego to endure. They also got goalied on that game. San Diego had a good, I would say honestly, they had a good 30 minutes where they tried to get it past Arundel. And Arundel was unstoppable. He was completely unstoppable. I've seen this from Arundel before. He has had games where he will just, go on another level, whatever it is. Arundel, 24 saves on 24 shots. That, I think, was probably his best game. Yes, I consider that game even better than the big-time win against the Coachella Valley Firebirds the week before. Bigger than that. So, big win for Ontario. That win Ontario needed. San Diego just getting shut out like that. Look, I've said this time and time again. The Gulls need to play a 60-minute game, and they did not do that on this one. They started off cold in this one. Ontario had all the momentum. They had puck opportunity, like they had scoring opportunity after scoring opportunity. They had puck possession for most of the start of the game. There was maybe 2-3 minutes, like at least one shift where there was at least 2 minutes where the puck never left the Reign offensive zone. And when the Gulls had a chance, you've heard this before, when the Gulls had a chance to clear the puck, they did not do that. So that's been a continuing problem for the San Diego Gulls. It continues to haunt them on this one. They lost 3-0 in what can be described as a forgettable game. We'll go with that. A forgettable game for the San Diego Gulls, and also one that had just a lot of rough stuff towards the end of the game. Nestorenko got into it. Fagimo got into it. Hickett. I mean, it was just... San Diego lost their cool on this one. Then we go to the following game. This was a very winnable game against the Bakersfield Condors. The Gulls finally returned home. This was the makeup game, by the way. That whole water main break. Well, this was the makeup game on Monday. And the Gulls did show up. They showed up late, but they showed up. San Diego got off to a good start. Ben King and Glenn Godden scored, and Trevor Carrick scored. But Bakersfield came right back, including a power play goal to Seth Griffith. I've said this again. The penalty kill has been hot and cold. It was hot for a while, and right now it is pretty cold. Yep. But the Gulls persevered on this one. They outshot Bakersfield 12-3 in the third period. Ben King saved the day. Stands by him. Ben King got the game winner, and then Josh Lapina with the empty netter. Gulls won that one 5-3. They finally broke the 7-game losing streak. Hallelujah. All right, I'm going to talk about the last game because I got a little bit more to say about that game. Stay locked in. Now, a brief word from Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this. Now through April 30th, Robinhood is boosting every single dollar you transfer from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right. No cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. Offers good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC is a registered broker-dealer. Welcome back to Locked On Gulls, which is under the umbrella of Locked On Anaheim Ducks and part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, you're locked in with Jason JD Hernandez. This will be kind of a late night Gulls Thursday, but here we go. Let's talk about the game against the Coachella Valley Firebirds, a team that I do public address for. This was a close game all the way around. This might have been one of the Gulls' best games of the season. It truly was. Even though they were shorthanded and only dressed 19 guys. Like, what? Yeah, they only dressed 19. Coachella Valley did play a little bit lackadaisical at times, but San Diego, I mean, they really showed up, especially towards the end of this game. And this is where I give credit to Sasha Pastujov. Pastujov, earlier in the season, he had a hat trick. He had a hat trick at one point, and this time he did what he does best. He gets the puck at the right place at the right time. And I have praised him quite a bit for a slew of reasons. But Pastujov is one of those guys that when healthy, I'm going to repeat this. When he is healthy, he's a dynamic player in this organization and should wind up being a top guy in the Gulls' future. Not right now, but in the Gulls' future once he gets healthy. Early on in the game, Devin Shore scored right away for the Firebirds, and then Agazino came back and scored 1-1 after a period. Second period, Braden Tracy. Chef's kiss on that one. And then Winterton scored, and the Gulls just kind of, oh boy, they let him have that one. So it's 2-2. Then Ryan Winterton. Yes, the same Ryan Winterton that I just talked about before. The same Ryan Winterton that was part of that 2022 Hamilton Bulldogs team. He put the Firebirds ahead. Yeah. I thought at that point, the Firebirds had that game won. It was 3-2 late in the game in favor of the Firebirds. And then Coachella Valley committed a very bad penalty. Jake Melanson got nailed for delay a game. That was a dumb penalty, folks. It's usually the Ducks or the Gulls that commit these dumb penalties. But Melanson, he just airmailed it. So the San Diego Gulls had their 5th power play opportunity, and Sasha Pastujov came through in the clutch and scored the game-time power play goal with only 4 minutes left. So we head to overtime. Both teams get a point. Both teams don't score in overtime. This was also important for Coachella Valley because all they needed was 1 point to gain first place in the entire Western Conference. Just 1 point. Just one. And they got that point. So we go to a shootout. This shootout was a long one and a fun one to watch. This one was fun if you're both a Firebirds fan and a Gulls fan, because someone else that I mentioned, Logan Morrison, yes, that same Logan Morrison, who was also on the 2022 Hamilton Bulldogs, he scored the only goal for the Firebirds in the shootout. Nikita Nestorenko scored on that same round for the Gulls. And it went back and forth until Sasha Pastujov scored the game-winning shootout goal. Woo! And it was a sick one. Y'all need to do yourselves a favor. Look at the highlights for that game, the Wednesday game. This was the Sasha Pastujov game. Absolutely was. So I will heap his praises forever. Sasha Pastujov, you're a bad man. You're a bad man. Oh, game-tying goal in the power play. Game-winning shootout goal. Man. Even though I work for the Firebirds, I gotta admit, that was a pretty fun game. And to see Pastujov come through like that for personal reasons, that was really cool to watch. So, Sasha, way to go. Salute to you. And if I was to have a 3 stars of the week, I would call Sasha Pastujov my number 1 star of the week just on the basis of that game. Because he single-handedly gave the Gulls that win. And a much-needed win, too, because in the standings right now, the Gulls are not in last place anymore. They got 48 points, but they're still 12 points out of a playoff spot from Bakersfield, who's looked better lately. The Gulls need to get going in a hurry if they want any chance of making the playoffs. So that's where we are right now. All right, that's going to do it for this podcast. Once again, thank you all so much for your continued support. And thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And we'll be back on Friday with a trade special. Yeah, Locked On Network is going to have a trade deadline special. I guess I'll be a part of that for a part of it. And then we'll go from there because the Ducks did make a big trade and they might not be done. You never know. Trade deadline is coming fast. In the meantime, you could follow me on Twitter at StimpyJD. The show's Twitter's at LO_Ducks, or you could email me at lockedonanaheimducks@gmail.com. And once again, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Listen ad-free on Amazon. And it's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And once again, thanks for your continued support. It is so greatly appreciated. For Locked On Anaheim Ducks, I'm Jason JD Hernandez saying have a great rest of the evening or late evening. Please remember to be safe out there. Be kind to one another. And Ducks and Gulls fly together.